All right, student, take your seats. Quiet down. Quiet down. Now, today, in light of truth and reconciliation, we're required to teach you all about the indigenous peoples who occupy these lands we live on. Today, we will be discussing the Metis people. Who are the Metis, you might ask? Metis people are a post-contact indigenous nation born from the unions of European fur traders and First Nations women in the 18th century. Excuse me.
What?
Morning, Samantha. Was I interrupting your nap?
Sorry, Mrs. Fuller.
Where was I? Oh, yes. The descendants of these marriages, the Metis, would form a distinct culture.
Mrs. Fuller?
Yes.
I don't mean to be rude, but isn't there a more engaging way you could teach us this material? The history of Métis people could be exciting.
How's that?
Well, Métis people are an example of what happens when two cultures come together to put their differences aside and use their strengths to create this world where indigenous people and settlers could live together, creating political and social structures, technology, and trade systems, as well as developing a unique presence in art, music, dance, and storytelling.
Wow, Miss Know-It-All. Would you like to teach this class?
Sure. Hello, my name is Samantha Loney, and welcome to the Traveling Métis podcast. I will be your host over these next 5 episodes. This podcast is designed to explore Métis culture. Each episode will talk to Métis people from across Turtle Island to learn about what it means to be Métis. These answers are their own opinions based on their unique experiences as Métis people. We talk to filmmakers, musicians, artists, historians on the fur trade. Don't turn off the podcast. We've got musical performances and fun comedy sketches to keep you entertained. Sit back and enjoy your journey as we travel down the river. You might be thinking, where do we begin in exploring Métis culture? The logical place to start would be to answer the question, what is Métis? Now, I'm not talking about the textbook definition we gave you in the opening sketch. Turtle Island is home to many Métis nations. Although we have culture to bring us together, there are many different perspectives on what it means to be Métis, depending on your region and human experience. I wanted to hear from actual Métis people, like myself, on what being Métis means to them.
For me, it means the best of both worlds. I think the biggest blessing and the biggest challenge of being a Métis person is not knowing where you belong.
Métis means that we walk 2 worlds, so the European way and the First Nations way. And I feel like we truly are like the bridge for a lot of different communities. And to me, being Métis means like walking in a good way and walking with love and balance and knowing that I carry a lot of my ancestors' hard work on my back.
Being Métis isn't just about you. It's about us. It's about a collective.
I think it's a part of my family history. I don't necessarily incorporate a lot of the traditions of being Métis into my daily practice.
Normally, I think of like community and family. That's kind of my biggest thing. And then like being a product of colonization, I guess, is the second one. And so when I think of the word Métis, to be honest, I think a lot about just like our dark history. And yeah, I think a lot about just like the exile that our people faced and how we haven't really had a place to belong
in our history since our inception as a peoples. And I feel like even to this day, there's a lot of issues about where we belong and how we belong.
Talking to Métis people across Turtle Island made me realize there is no one way to be Métis. A unique part of being Métis is we don't hold status like our First Nations kin. We hold citizenship to our governing Métis Nation. I am a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Controversial, I know. But since a big part of being Métis is your connection to your community, I wanted to sit down with someone who spends time with our youth and helps them discover what it means to be Métis. I sat down with Jordyn Playne, the president of the Métis Nation of Ontario's Youth Council, and asked her what it means to be Métis.
That's a really interesting question, right? Because I think a lot of people actually don't understand what Métis means. And I guess I could give you like the definition that exists under Pali of what Métis people are, but we are just a unique and distinct Indigenous people. As we know in so-called Canada, there's three distinct Indigenous peoples: the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And Métis people, it's not just this idea of like someone who exists with mixed ancestry. There's multiple layers that exist within understanding Métis identity. And that includes our culture, our communities, having a tie to community, being accepted by community, and also having that distinct connection to, for example, in Ontario, a family line, right? And so my family line is the Desaulnes Claremont. I'm very fortunate to have been born and raised in my community and in what I would say is the heart of maybe Métis people in Ontario. I know the folks up in the Sioux might argue different, but a very vibrant Métis community. So we are such a distinct people with our own language, our own culture, our own teachings, our own customs, our own governing structure. That's what Métis means to me, is just the uniqueness that makes us Indigenous people. We walk in these two worlds, right? This idea of both being of First Nations as well as European descent. We have this mixed identity that's super complex, but also so vibrant and rich.
And you mentioned you've been fortunate enough to grow up in your community as well. Because I know a lot of Métis youth are like, oh, I didn't grow up with my community or my culture. It was kind of something in their 20s that they had to sort of discover and get involved in the community on their own. If you wanted to talk about your own personal journey with your culture and exploring your heritage.
So my paternal side is where my Métis family comes from. And my mère, my dad shares these stories of my mère being really like made fun of a lot for the way that she looked or the way that she acted or some of the cultural components that she engaged in. And so she really didn't speak much about being Métis, which I think that's actually a common thing that I hear amongst a lot of young people, is that it was really taboo to talk about. We didn't really visit. We were always French Canadian. I grew up in a really French community, Penetang, Lapointe, right? I went to French school my whole life, and that's what we always were. But there was always these small nuances that existed for my dad, where he was a hunter and a harvester, spent a lot of time on the land, a huge morel picker back in his day, and really, really community and family oriented. And I would assume my dad has always known to some degree we were Métis, but I just remember coming home one day. It was actually first year university. I didn't know that we were Métis up until the day I actually got my citizenship. I came home from Thanksgiving and my dad said, "Here you go, congratulations, you're Métis." And I was like, what? What does this mean? And so it actually kickstarted what has now been an 11-year journey to understanding who Métis people are, who my family is, the connection my family has to the community that I live in and that I was born and raised in. And it's really driven me career-wise. I'm a social worker. I work primarily with Indigenous people. My training comes from Indigenous studies. Everything I've done now has been reconnection and relearning the stories of my family. And one that I think my mère would be really proud of is for me to kind of kickstart that journey for a lot of my family members. in unpacking our Métis culture and heritage.
That's really interesting because, yeah, for me as well, like we always grew up knowing we were Indigenous, but anytime you would ask about it, it's like, oh, don't worry about it. Like it's nothing. Again, they were from Northern Ontario too, right? Small towns, like trying to hide, like if you could. Yeah, I was wondering if you had any advice for any youth or anyone. In my great aunt's 82 and she's just starting to go back and learn the culture that like she never got to experience. But yeah, if you have any advice for people like kind of going on like their cultural journey and learning about their ancestry and their family.
Yeah, I think something that I always talk to young people about is knowing your stories. My family line is a very prominent one in my community, the Deschamps Claremonts. We're a very popular folk in Region 7. So we have a lot of stories, and a lot of our stories are oral, but a lot of them are also written, and we've signed a lot of marriage license and baptismal certificates, and we've played a big role in the community. And so understanding your stories is really important to understand who you are and what role your Métis identity has played in history in Ontario, or if you are connected to the prairies, what role has your family played, right? I think that allows you to understand the weight that your ancestors carried and where to pick that up. I can understand it's daunting. It's really scary to have this card or this citizenship, right? Or being told that you're Métis and trying to unpack that is really complex, and it's not an easy task, but I encourage folks to know your stories, sit with our elders, attend community events, right? All across Ontario, we have a beautiful and vibrant Métis community in our historic communities and our non-rights bearing communities as well. So getting connected with your local council, community members, things like that, I think will help folks dip their toe into the pool of never-ending Métis identity and culture and community.
I guess like define, if you could, like what a historic Métis community is, and just because I think a lot of people think like, oh, what is that? Or again, we're used to hearing about like the prairie Métis and things like that, because historically, like that's kind of been what's been taught and like told to us. But yeah, if you could just define that, and for anyone who's like curious or like, what is that? Like what?
Yeah, and I think that's an important note that you just touched on, right? Is that having grown up in a French school, I learned a lot about Louis Riel. And it's funny because I grew up in what is a vibrant and very largely populated Métis community. And we never actually learned about Métis people and in our community. And so an important piece as well as around citizenship is that in the Métis Nation of Ontario, your citizenship doesn't, your cultural ties don't have to tie back to a historic community in Ontario. We have many folks, even on our elected boards, that their ancestors actually are from Red River, are from the prairies, are from Saskatchewan, right? And we as Métis people are mobile. And I think it's really important to recognize that we weren't in one place for very long. We moved. And so that's an important piece as well when understanding citizenship, is that in Ontario, you don't have to exactly connect to an Ontario specific community. It can be anything kind of Ontario westward. Yeah, but when talking or thinking about what is a historic community, I think it's important even to contextualize it a little bit more, going back to like 2003, the Pauli case that came through, right? Because I think that was a really pivotal moment in Métis history across the homeland, but especially here in Ontario, because it was the first time that we were recognized as Métis people with inherent rights to harvest on the land. And from that court decision, it actually propelled the MNO to do further research, because the Pauli test was really based in and around the Sault Ste. Marie area, which is now also the historic Sault Ste. Marie community, which again, another large concentration of Métis people exist along those Great Lakes. But the historic communities, I believe we have 6 of them now. So anything from like Rainy River, kind of Lake of the Woods, up in some Treaty 3 territory up there, Sault Ste. Marie, Georgian Bay. These are all historic communities. And what that means is that it means that there was an existence of Métis people in that community historically. So it's not just folks of mixed ancestry that existed, but of Métis people, that language, that culture, those things that made us Métis existed in creating that community. And so a lot of the communities actually fall in and around the Great Lakes. We were voyageurs, paddlers, a lot of folks.
Anywhere there's a body of water might be a Métis community.
Exactly. And so that's what you'll find, like the Mattawa area. So it's really just a recognition that Métis people existed there, and that it was a distinct community. And that's where a lot of places will identify, like, I am from the historic Georgian Bay community because I am a rights-bearing citizen from my region, from a community that is identified as a historic community.
Do you think there are any benefits to belonging to the Métis Nation? Because of course you could be Métis and choose not to get your citizenship.
This is a gray area as well, because I also recognize that to some degree, a lot of the conversations I've had with young people in particular is that they feel as if they don't need to prove to anyone who they are, right? And I hear that amongst our Indigenous kin as well, particularly folks that fall under the Indian Act. Like, I don't need to prove to the Canadian government that I am an Indigenous person. And so I see that transcending to young people as well. But what I'm also cognizant of is that we exist in this world right now of pretendians and faties. So fake Métis, fake Indigenous people. We're seeing it in academia. We're seeing it in these large scale institutions where people were hired in equity spots that actually were not Indigenous and were claiming something that is not theirs. They were claiming a history, a language, a culture that has nothing to do with who they are. And so what I'm seeing across the board, and particularly in things like the Métis Nation of Ontario, Métis National Council, across some of our governing bodies, is that in order to access programs and services within these institutions, such as the Métis Nation of Ontario, we now have to demonstrate that we are a verified citizen. Because, again, a lot of the money comes from the federal government, the provincial government, and they want to ensure that they are supporting Indigenous people. And so that's where I would say some of those benefits come in terms of accessing programming, attending assemblies, attending conferences, stuff like that exist within the Métis Nation. But even at like the grassroots level, I think a lot of our local community councils, like the Georgian Bay Community Council, is such a stellar council for helping community, like handing out food gift cards. We have local meat shops that they support, and they give meat boxes out to citizens. So I think even some of that has really, we're seeing that needing to have that citizenship to access some of those programs. And again, we're seeing it more so when folks are applying to schools now. If you're applying in an equity spot or you're applying for funding, is that these institutions, again, want to ensure that the funding is going towards folks who are Indigenous and are Métis.
Do you think there's any other benefits to just connecting with your culture and the Métis community?
That connection to community, it's healing. Mental health goes hand in hand. I've found for myself, when I've called the Métis Nation of Ontario my home. I found my home, I found family, a community that I never knew I needed. And now I can't picture it with my life without my community. So it's this place where there's this shared understanding, I would say, that exists within the Métis communities that we don't have to explain often. Like, I'm a Métis person and my identity was hidden from me, and all of these nuances of like being told you were French Canadian and then actually not being French Canadian. So, and those are really difficult things to explore. And when you get in a room full of Métis people, your story's really common. And it just feels, I can't explain it other than like, it feels like walking in and being at home. When I've been around the Métis community, and I hope that's one that a lot of young people experience. I'm also the president of the Métis Nation of Ontario Youth Council, and that's something that we really do strive for, is that feeling of home for young people, no matter where you lie in terms of having your citizenship, in the process of getting your citizenship, having a mom who has it, or having a family member, right? We are there to support young Métis people as they start to understand and unpack some of these really heavy areas like identity. And so we carve out spaces. We take young people to the land and we had a wonderful opportunity this year where we partnered with the Weaving Wellness Center, a Métis owned and operated psychotherapy clinic, where we took 21 young people out to the land in Mattawa and spent 3 days just mental health, land healing. Like, it was just such a beautiful way to connect with people. And it had all different degrees of folks who had just gotten their citizenship to folks who've been citizens since the day they were born, basically. So a whole spectrum of folks, but it's healing. It really is.
Yeah, I think as I got older, I kind of discovered like the benefits of community, because when I was younger, I was like really independent, like, oh, I can do everything by myself. Like, I know everything. Like, I don't need other people's help for stuff. But I think, yeah, like as I've aged, it's nice to have people to lean on and like you said, to share your story. Because sometimes as a Métis person, if you go to like a powwow or you go to other like Indigenous events that maybe are First Nations led, like you're kind of like, do I fit in here? But then when you're, around other Métis people, you realize like, oh, like I am Indigenous, like I am like someone who belongs in this space. So it's nice, to have other people to relate to.
That's a really good kind of comment that you made there around of like attending ceremonies, attending powwows, ribbon skirts, right? These are huge things that I see often people are grappling with, like, is this something I can attend? Is this something I wear? Like, what is the context of that in terms of Métis people, my family, my stories? And there's this really awesome book. It's by Chantal Fioza, if I'm saying it correctly, I think. And it's called Métis People Go to Ceremony, Returning to Who We Are. And it's really, really wonderfully written in terms of just understanding where we fit into the context of going to powwows, going to ceremony, wearing ribbon skirts, wearing ribbon pants, shirts, ribbon everything, holding a drum, right? All of these things. Because I think a lot of people who are coming into understanding who they are, these are questions that we ask ourselves because we don't know what we don't know.
Maybe we wanted to talk about like some misconceptions about like Métis people and stuff like that, where maybe like First Nations people who would be listening or non-Indigenous people listening. Because I think a lot of people do think that, oh, it's just a mixed heritage person.
One of the things that exists quite often for people is that when they maybe aren't sure of who Métis people are or who they are as an Indigenous person with maybe mixed ancestry, they often will identify as Métis. And I'm very protective of that title. And I often use the quote, like, my identity isn't a pit stop on the way to you understanding who you are. Like, don't just throw that around, because it really discredits the fact that Métis people are unique, distinctive. We are not just a people of mixed blood. We are so much more. We have, I think of our beautiful beadwork and how that is so distinct to Métis people. I'm not a beader myself. My dear friend Mitch Case can talk for hours and hours, days and days on what makes beadwork for Métis people so unique and distinctive. But we do have all of these nuances that exist. So I right off the bat is that we aren't a people of just mixed blood. Just because you had a great ancestor who was in First Nations and somehow someone connected with a white person does not make you Métis. That is not true in any sense. I think another misconception, I think even going back to elementary school and high school, one of the things that someone had said, I think it must have been like grade 9 or grade 8 history class, where someone had said like, Métis people are a byproduct of unconsensual relations between First Nations and like Europeans. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And I recently went last year to a conference out in BC where, again, someone else said that at a microphone. They had said, like, we are a byproduct of unconsensual relationships. And the entire room went silent. And we were like, no, that is not accurate. Like, that might be some stories, but for most people, that is not our story. That is not the story of my family.
Mine either. Yeah.
Yeah. And so some of those nuances also exist, right? Colonization wants to dilute the beautiful parts of what make Indigenous people Indigenous. And I also recognize, like, as Métis people, we are a direct byproduct of colonization. That is, like, inevitably we are.
Yeah, we wouldn't be here without, the French coming over. And
yeah, and I think actually even there, right, there's also this misconception that Métis people are only of French and like European French descent, where I even think in the Georgian Bay community, there's folks that are of Irish, I think it's Irish or Scottish descent. Like my step siblings are originally from Mackinac, which is not too far away from Drummond Island. But they aren't French descendant. That is not their European heritage with their Ojibwe ancestors. So I think that's also something that's important to recognize, that it wasn't just that hybrid of French and First Nations.
A pretendian is a person falsely claiming Indigenous identity by claiming to be a citizen of an Indigenous tribe or nation, usually for their own personal gain, to get equity spots in academic institutions, or to represent Indigenous groups in entertainment or media. It's an extreme form of cultural appropriation and ethnic fraud. I'm not here to be the Indigenous police. I'll leave that up to our friends at the Maurice Pretendian Show. Welcome back to the Maurice Pretendian Show. The show focused on ancestry DNA because everyone seems to think they're native these days. Today, we have Jocelyn Moore on the show, a young woman who has long believed she is Métis. Hello, Jocelyn.
Hello, Maurice.
Now, Jocelyn, you say you've known you were Métis all the way back to childhood?
Yes, Maury. My journey started when I was a little girl. We were always told our great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was an Indian princess.
Did you tell this to the registry?
I did. And they've been gaslighting me ever since, telling me I need to bring some sort of evidence of a connection to some historic Métis community. So I went in for one of those ancestry DNA tests.
Even though they didn't ask you to.
DNA does not lie. I am 118 Native American.
And that means you're Métis?
Well, as you can see, I am white, but with that 1/18th of Indian blood running through my veins. That means someone was around. I believe it's called teepee creeping. I can say that because I am 1/18th Native after all. I am mixed. That makes me Métis.
Uh-huh. Well, we have someone from the registry with us here today to help humiliate you. I mean, determine whether or not you are Métis. Let's bring them out.
Look at this skin tone. Look at this. You think a white person could get a tan like this?
Yes, I think white people are quite capable of tanning.
My cheekbones. Look at these. Maurice, you can't tell me I don't got some of that Indian blood running through these veins.
Yeah, you and Elizabeth Warren.
My DNA results don't lie. I am mixed race.
I think this is a common misconception by non-Métis folks, that being half white and half Indigenous makes someone Métis, when in actuality, Métis people have created a distinct culture. To be considered Métis citizen, you must be able to connect your ancestry to a historically recognized Métis settlement.
Well, Jocelyn?
My cheekbones!
Right. Well, we don't have to wait any longer because we have the test results in. When it comes to your family having a connection to a historic Métis settlement, we have determined that you are not Métis.
I told you. I told you.
Well, there you have it, folks. Next, joining us is a southern white man claiming he is a descendant of slaves. Yikes. How do you think that's affected Métis people? Because I've had conversations with Métis youth where some of them are scared to join the community if they're still learning about where they're from and their culture, because they don't feel like they've earned it, or they don't want to be caught like saying something or doing something wrong, which is the complete opposite of your learning about your culture. Like, of course, you're going to make mistakes and learn things that aren't true. Obviously, we have our families tell us stories, and it's like, well, that might not be true. Someone could have just said that.
It impacts maybe all Indigenous people, but from a Métis perspective and from a young person perspective, I go back to a lot of like our ancestral teachings, right? Like this idea of like approaching things with humble, like being very humble about where you are in understanding your journey as a Métis person. Because we need to be humble, and it's constantly learning, right? And to approach it out of that sense rather than just kind of like being really scared, right? I guess we can be scared, but being humble and recognizing that your ancestors fought really, really hard to be Indigenous and to be Métis and to have that culture exist, and that language and the art forms, and recognizing that there's this quote that I see all over Instagram that says like, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And that is really, I would encourage folks to lean back on that we are doing the work that our ancestors were picking up where they left off. And so encouraging them to do that, but also recognizing you don't have to earn your Métis, your Métis identity, right? Like that's the beautiful thing about Métis people is that we are Métis. That if you think to like that infinity sign, I've heard some teachings that talk about like that is a symbol for the fact that like Métis people are going to continue forever. I know within 15 generations, my 15th great grandchildren will be Métis. And hopefully they will know from the day they are born that they are Métis from conception, that they won't have to go through what my mère did, where she was shamed into hiding it. And then my dad carrying some of those kind of skills and eventually showing me, right? And I hope that doesn't exist, so that we can continue the beautiful Métis nation that exists.
Whenever I like come across someone who like either is like, oh, you're not really Indigenous, like trying to shame me for like my Métis-ness, it's like I'm just like doing this for my ancestors who couldn't. I'm learning and trying to proudly be Métis for a lot of people, like we talked about, that so many people had to hide who they were just to survive, and because of like colonialism and things like that, they couldn't outwardly, like we obviously know like everything that's happening in the news with Indigenous groups, like the government has done so much to try to erase cultures and things like that. So I think anytime you're trying to learn about who you are and your culture, it's like you're doing it for the people before you who couldn't.
Yeah. And I also want to kind of echo what you had just said and further articulate that the government does try so hard to limit, erase, defund, kind of really make it really difficult for Indigenous people to exist across so-called Canada, that it makes me really sad when I see lateral violence that does exist within our communities. And that folks say like, I've been told before, like, you're a fake, like, you're not real, you're fake, like, you're just like a little white girl. And to some extent, like, yeah, when I am white passing, like those things do exist. I can be Indigenous and white passing. Those they can all exist. I have cousins that are Indigenous and Colombian. This all exists, and this is what makes, I think, Métis people so beautiful, and all Indigenous people so beautiful, is that we've adapted and we change, and that I don't think we should be perpetuating and continuing to perpetuate this idea of like colonization of like, you're not real, like you aren't us, right? And we are part of the Métis Nation. We are part of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I am a proud citizen of my community, an active member of my community, and that just trying to remember that the systems we exist in are made to try to dismantle us, but grounding yourself in who you are and your identity will help you try to fight against those systems that so tirelessly work to eradicate Indigenous people from them.
And like, I always think like a lot of those people who are accusing people of, who actually have like Indigenous ancestry and heritage, the people who are like trying to tell you you're fake, are usually coming from like a place of trauma themselves, of whatever's like, it usually has like nothing to do with you. It's whatever trauma they're bringing.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like right now, and I will just briefly touch on this, like the Métis Nation of Ontario, in a sense right now, this is a hot topic, right? In terms of like our governance of what's happening with unverified citizens and plebiscites and all of these things that are like inherently political that are happening. And essentially what is happening is some folks are feeling as if they are being told like, you actually aren't Métis. And in a sense, they are being told that. because they don't have those things, like we had said earlier, that maybe do inherently make them Métis, right? That like connection to the community, historic family lines, all of these things that don't actually make them Métis, that maybe they are then just folks of mixed ancestry. So just wanted to briefly touch on that all of that, these are all nuances that exist, I think, even within the Métis Nation and some of our political realms as well.
2 years ago when I got my citizenship, it was nothing but like help to try to help me find these documents. So it's like the Métis community wants you if you are, like they will help you. But unfortunately, yeah, like if it's not there, it's not there. But yeah, how do you think, but just historically, how the Métis community has grown? Because I know when I was younger and didn't really know too much about Métis people, it was like, oh, always just go right back to like the 1800s and the fur trade, like, and we've obviously grown as a people from that because times have changed and we're modern people.
I think we've grown as a community and shifted and changed from just this idea of like being paddlers and fur traders and like actively involved in all of that, right? Like post-war of 1812 stuff, that we've shifted and changed so much since then that we are in all realms of the world, right? But when I think also about like what's the landscape that's happened within the Métis Nation of Ontario, is our communities are growing at an exponential rate, right? I think of, again, a lot of my ideas and influences come from the Georgian Bay community because that's where I've been born and raised. But the Georgian Bay community, the numbers are increasing every day. The captain of the hunt is signing more and more harvesting cards, right? They're super busy because I think, again, there's this idea that so many people kept it in the dark or didn't speak about it. Like these are the commonalities that exist amongst people. And as we grow and progress throughout time and more people are talking about Métis ancestry and Métis people, and documents are more readily available as well. If you check out the Métis Nation Ontario website, they actually have a lot of the family lines that came out of the historic community research. Those family lines were the ones that existed within those historic communities that really played integral roles in establishing those communities. And so, for example, like my family line, the Desome Claremont, you can click on that and actually see everything. Like Josephine Desome is my ancestor, and you can see the death certificates, the birth certificates, the marriage certificates. So it also makes it a lot easier for folks to access, therefore making it less barriers to getting your citizenship. Because now, speaking to my dad, he talked a lot about how when he first applied, it was a 2-year wait for him to get his citizenship. He used to have an old laminated card. So he's had his citizenship since, my guess is like the early 2000s. And so he had that. And he said it took so long to get all of the documents in place, where now when I have a kid, all they have to do is submit their long form birth certificate showing that they are directly connected to me. And it's a lot easier of a process. And I believe we're also moving to, you can now follow your status online to see where it's at in terms of application. It's not taking 2 years. So it's trying to limit the barriers so that folks can access their citizenship in a lot quicker fashion. Decreasing barriers, right? We did that with our harvesting cards. We did that with our citizenship. So decreasing those barriers is really important because we know that Métis people, to get all of that information, it's so long, and anything we can do to make it easier for folks.
I mean, it is. I'm like a history buff, so I find that interesting and fun to go through. Like, I easily got access to all my information, but then I was like with my great aunt, because you could kind of track like where your family's traveled, and like, because like you said, Métis people kind of weren't like stagnant in one spot. Like you traveled and you go where there's work and things like that. So it's, I don't know, I find that fun.
And it also gives you an opportunity through doing some of that genealogical research to know and understand your family stories, right? It's cool to go to a meeting. One of my favorite things is when I say, hi, my name's Jordyn Playne. I'm a descendant of the Desome Claremont family line. After, someone will come up to me and say, we're cousins, or, oh, your ancestor signed my ancestor's marriage certificate. And just like learning all of these stories that exist, again, is such a beautiful way to know who we are.
How do you think youth can connect to their Métis identity in this like modern world? I know like it's always, we have activities that you can go like on canoe trips and things like that, but what are some of the fun things Métis youth can do to try to connect with the community?
What I would say I'm really proud of is that the past over 8 years, so I've been involved as an elected representative for coming up on 8 years, but the youth movement began far before my tenure as an elected representative, is getting connected with the Métis Nation Ontario Youth Council. So that is 29 and under, because that is their focus, is ensuring that young people are involved in the community, that they feel at home, that they can access supports, that we currently have a distribution list where I would argue almost every day our chair is sending out different opportunities for young people to connect with things like, I know the Laidlaw Foundation, right? That's how the grant, right? We send that stuff out, post-secondary funding, job opportunities, anything that's happening that could relate to young people. We try to get it out there as much as possible, so that hopefully someone will see the email or the Instagram post, the Facebook post, and get hooked in, because that's all it takes is one thing that catches your eye. You come in and hopefully you feel at home and want to keep coming back. One of the big things the Youth Council does every year in the lead up to our annual General Assembly every year in August is we host a youth leadership conference, where actually this year, by the time this comes out, it will have passed, but we're bringing in people to just like start off like, who are Métis people? Let's talk about that at like a foundational level. And then let's send them into workshops where they can learn like Métis beading, jigging, learn from people who are Métis academics, and just like bringing in all of these awesome Métis people and having young people learn at that foundational level.
That sounds fun. I wish I was under 30. I won't keep you for too much longer, but if there was anything that you felt like you didn't say that you wanted to sort of maybe express about Métis people or anything that came to mind that I didn't really ask a question about, and you're like, oh, I really wanted to share this.
Yeah, I think maybe just re-articulating that don't be afraid to ask questions. No question is a dumb question when it comes to wanting to understand who Métis people are, your communities, how to get involved in community, because at one point or another, we were all in the same canoe. So we all get what it's like to try to understand. And so I'm hopeful that the communities are all receptive and no question cannot be answered. And if folks don't have the answer, someone will connect you with someone to find the answer. But yeah, just asking the questions is important, because it can be quite overwhelming unpacking Métis identity and understanding it.
Yeah, I feel like for even our ancestors, like way back, because they were mixed, they probably were thinking the same thing, like, who am I? Like, what like what is being Métis mean? Like, now I'm mixed with these two cultures, right?
Exactly. And I can only imagine my future children are going to have the same questions. They're going to be half German and Métis, and they're going to say the same questions. Who am I? And both of those things can exist for people, that they're going to be so proud of their German heritage, and they're going to be so proud, hopefully, of their Métis ancestry. And both those things can exist for people, and just asking the questions.
Thank you to Jordyn Playne for such an insightful interview. Unpacking the complexities of Métis culture and people can be tough, especially if you've started listening to this podcast with no clue as to what Métis culture is. I was talking to a writing mentor of mine about doing this podcast on Métis culture. She had no idea who or what Métis people were. I needed to find some way to communicate the culture in a way that she could understand. She's Jewish, so I started to relate it to her culture. Métis people wandered around the fur trade routes, like Jewish people wandering the desert, struggling to find a place to fit in. That got me thinking, what stories could I tell to help communicate how Métis people started? I decided to write a little tale that might sound familiar. It's inspired by Fiddler on the Roof, a tale about a Jewish man marrying off his daughters. The names and culture have been changed to reflect that of Métis people. I present to you the Métis on the Roof.
A Métis on the roof. Sounds crazy, no? But here at the Red River, you might say every one of us is a Métis on the roof, playing a balancing act between our European and indigenous roots, refusing to choose between one of two cultures but creating our own. It wasn't easy. You might ask, why create a unique culture in a world where being a half-breed was not celebrated? Well, because we are not half anything. And how do we create balance? That I can tell you in one word: tradition. Because of our traditions, we've kept our balance for many, many years. Here in the Red River, we have a tradition for everything. We have our sash, we bead, we hunt, and we fish. For instance, we have an old tradition where indigenous women were married off to French fur traders to make one people. You may ask, how did this tradition get started? I'll tell you. I don't know. But it was a tradition not accepted by all at first.
As cook, can I ask you a question?
Certainly, Canty.
Will you marry off one of your daughters to a Frenchman?
A Frenchman? I think anyone would be a fool to marry Frenchmen. Speaking of, how was your little girl's wedding?
Of course, indigenous women were being married off to gain military, trade, and cultural advantages was nothing new. Tribes had been doing this for decades, but the French, they knew a greater enemy was coming. They had seen no one fight greater than the peoples who already occupied these lands.
All this talk of one people, what would the Creator think?
The Creator didn't want us to be one people. Why would he bring the French to this land?
You ask too many questions. Listen, this is why the Creator gave you such big ears. What is that?
Sounds like Creator has answered your prayers.
Bonjour, monsieur. My name is Jean-Pierre. I have traveled long and far and have enjoyed my time on your beautiful land.
Please have some food.
To go.
To stay. As cook, I am sure you can find something in common to discuss.
There's nothing similar between me and this Frenchman.
Un ennemi? As you may know, we are not the only ones who seek habitation on these lands. We do not wish to destroy the wonderful world that you have created, but enjoy it together, no?
As one people.
Oui. Now, I seek a wife. I hear you have many daughters.
You heard wrong.
What was that?
That is a silly tree blowing in the wind who would quiet down if she knew what was good for her.
Askook, please. We have 3 beautiful daughters. Our eldest is out back. Please, get yourself acquainted.
Oh, merci.
The only reason they want our daughters to take our land.
No one owns this land. It belongs to Creator.
Then it's not his either.
The land is to be shared. Even Sky Woman was a guest here. Creator has brought these people to us. Think of how the world could be if we decided to work together.
How the world could be? You spend too much time thinking of the future.
You spend no time thinking at all. You should listen to your wife. Women are wise.
Yes. We should listen to women. Who is to say our daughters love this man? Forcing a woman to marry a man never works.
I was sent off by my father to marry you.
And yet you still fight for this life for your daughter?
We have built a strong family, and I only want to see us grow stronger.
No.
Askook.
If she wishes to leave, it will be the last you see of her. She will be gone forever.
She will not. She will carry us on through her heart. She will share our knowledge with these new people. Creator will guide her. She will do the right thing.
Though it is still a long battle for the harmony of indigenous peoples and settlers on this land, Askook's daughter married Jean-Pierre, and the generations of children after them continue to fight for a world of peace on these lands.
that's the end of our show, folks. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Once again, I am your host, Samantha Loney. I want to thank our featured guest, Jordyn Playne, for sharing her knowledge with us. Etienne Beausoleil for providing the music in this episode. This episode was written and directed by myself, Samantha Loney, edited by Cassidy Villabrum Baracus, and produced by the Métis and Me program, with support from our sponsors, the Barrie South Simcoe Métis Council, along with the City of Barrie. The next episode of the Traveling Métis podcast takes us to the fur trade. See you down the river, and don't forget to like and subscribe.